Time now for the Sunday Talk, where we tap into the debate of the week. This week, do you still have to speak French to be Prime Minister? This week, Conservative leadership candidates faced off in English and French. Some French skills left much to be desired.
Je suis très fier de l'ancien gouvernement conservateur dans les enjeux de justice.
Some stumbled.
Investments in infrastructure and in education égale une économique forte.
Some used a little franglais.
Si, j'aime les emplois maritimes, bien sûr, parce que I was the harbor master in Toronto.
And libre-échange to sell that lobster elsewhere.
Reaction was swift on Twitter, some calling it insulting, others just wishing it would stop. But some are challenging the whole idea that to be PM, you need to be at least somewhat bilingual, including this potential candidate.
I'm not worried that I don't speak French. I speak the language of jobs.
The idea of two founding nations runs deep. So do the debates. Tensions peaked in the 60s.
I think this whole thing could be settled so easily if they would teach their children English in school in Quebec.
Then Pierre Trudeau was elected. In 1969, the Official Languages Act made English and French equal, meaning across the country, you had to be bilingual for some federal jobs. There was pushback.
The leaders of the French-speaking people are some of the most selfish, self-centered egotists.
By the 80s, bilingualism became more popular. But the country is changing. By 2011, the number of Canadians whose mother tongue was neither English nor French had exploded to about 6 million, almost as many as the 7 million whose first language is French. So, is the bilingual dream in trouble? I'm joined by our panelists. Jonathan Kay is editor-in-chief of Walrus Magazine. Adrian Batra is editor-in-chief of the Toronto Sun. And joining us tonight from Montreal, Martin Patrickin is the Quebec bureau chief for Maclean's Magazine. So, Martin, you're in Montreal. You probably heard some reaction in the province of Quebec. What did you think watching that debate?
I mean, cringeworthy, embarrassing, ouch. Yes, all those adjectives apply. But I think it is a testament to how important bilingualism is in the modern day Canada for however many years after it was introduced, that 9, I would say, you know, to be conservative, let's say 12 or 11 people out of the 14 that were on that stage felt compelled to get up there and absolutely massacre the French language because it's something that they have to do, and they realize that they have to be able to have a modicum of French in order to be to serve in public office at the highest office in this country. Well,
that's putting a positive spin on it. What did you think, John?
It took me back to high school French class. And
wasn't that bad, John? Come on.
It was just, well, it actually reminded me of a WestJet flight attendant from Calgary who was, you know, giving the French language safety instructions when you're flying from Toronto to Vancouver or something like that. It was just kind of like French for the sake of French. And I guess I agree with Martin that there's something charming about them making the effort. But, you know, it was cringeworthy. Even someone like me, I'm not a fluent French speaker, I actually found it quite bad.
What do you think, Adrian?
Well, I agree with Jonathan and Martin. It was cringeworthy, but, you know, they did give it the old college try. And I mean, I don't wholeheartedly disagree with anything that's been said right now, but I think for anybody that actually watched the debate, perhaps other than people around this table, I don't think a lot of Canadians were tuned into it. But I also don't think it necessarily disqualifies you from being the Prime Minister of this country if you're not proficient in this official language.
You don't have to be proficient.
So, well, I mean, and in this instance, at least they gave it, at least they made the effort. And I think for generally speaking, a lot of Canadians, that might just be good enough.
Well, I was trying to remember, I don't go all the way back, but I can't remember, Martin, a Prime Minister who hasn't been better at French than most of the people on that podium. I mean, I guess there's two things here. Where are Canadians? How do we see this? But also, is it possible practically to get elected, to become the Prime Minister without speaking a bit more French?
I don't think so. Look, you look at no better example than Stephen Harper. 2001, he was president, if I'm not mistaken, of the National Citizens Coalition. Out there in Calgary, called bilingualism the god that failed. Fast forward 12 years, and he, you know, not only spoke fluent French, began all his speeches in French, but oversaw the biggest increase in funding to bilingual services in Canadian in 40 years or something like this. I know there's all sorts of opinions on Stephen Harper in this world, but I think most people can agree that he was a very astute politician, and if he recognized the importance of being able to at least speak a working man's French for the very sake of representing 6.5 million francophone speakers in French speakers, pardon me, in Quebec, 1 million outside of Quebec. Again, it's a political reality.
I think part of the issue is for the general election. Of course, Quebec has a lot of seats, and there are so many people in the province of Quebec that still, of course, want to have their language recognized. There's no question about that. That's for a general. But for the purposes of this this leadership race, for the Conservative leadership race, because the way they've weighed the ridings, it's not necessarily going to be the #1 issue. I mean, I don't think it's going to matter.
When they're up against the Liberals and the NDP.
That's where I think it has a bigger impact,
exactly.
and is on the general. Like, look, we can even go back to Belinda Stronach, remember when she was a Conservative in 2004 and she was running for leader? She did proportionally well in Quebec, even though she couldn't speak barely even functional French. I mean, what we saw on stage from the other night was far better than what she could do. But if a guy like Kevin O'Leary, who is very plain-spoken about the fact that he grew up in Montreal but he doesn't speak French, is prepared to dive into this race, supposedly in the next couple of weeks, I don't think that the voters for the Conservatives are going to care that he doesn't actually have proficiency in English at all.
But they will in Quebec. Stephen Harper got something at however many seats he got in the last election. Wouldn't have gotten a single one here had he not come here and campaigned in French. That's a political reality. If Mr. O'Leary jumps into the race, he's quickly going to be told that yes, you're going to have to bone up on your French. And look, you don't have to be proficient. And this is a very important part about it. There's a sweet spot to the sort of second language issue in Canadian government. I put it this way: I go, you have to be good enough in French to be understood, but bad enough to be pitied. And then if you hit that, then you're perfect. That's all you really need. I mean, and that goes, by the way, that goes for English and French. That goes for Jean Chrétien as well.
Yes.
But John, something is changing here, because Kevin O'Leary maybe 10 years ago wouldn't have been able to say that, those people on the stadium, but like, there is something going on. So is that a sign of real change?
Well, look, I grew up in Montreal like Kevin, and like him, my French is bad. I'm ashamed of that, but it's true. Right now, for people who are younger, it's pretty much impossible to grow up in Quebec, even in Montreal, and not have at least decent French. That is changing. It's changing in part because of social media and the internet. It's changing because people are now going back and forth between English and French rather casually in Quebec. During my time, during Kevin's time, you had English enclaves, you had French enclaves. And I think the English community in Montreal, Quebec in general, imagined that they could live their entire life in English, and some of them could, but that very much has changed. And I think Martin is right, that right now the reality in Quebec is that you at least need to show that you've made a good faith effort to learn the language.
Yeah.
But the country's changing. It used to be the two founding nations, and to speak otherwise or even to suggest otherwise was seen as provocative.
Of course.
Adrian, is the demographics now? You have a growing population of people whose first language is not French or English.
Yeah.
So how does that change?
Well, I think part of, we can't change our languages acts and have official status based on, I think, our immigration patterns, because there would have been a point when Ukrainian would have been
Polish,
an official
Italian,
language.
exactly.
German, Italian.
But right now, I mean, there's a large swath of Canadians that are speaking Tagalog, and that's growing far more than it is for English and French, even with Hindi, Punjabi, Mandarin. So I think that, so many immigrants, my parents would speak to me in Punjabi, but I would answer in English, and we grew up in Western Canada. So, we had, the French language classes. I don't think that there's I don't think that there's this conversation is happening around dinner tables that we're losing French. I don't think that's happening in this country.
I think it's important to remember that outside of Quebec, bilingualism has always been a creed in official Canadian circles. I think average Anglophones generally haven't cared that much about bilingualism. And that is being accentuated now, because if you go to Vancouver or parts of Toronto, and there are jobs that require bilingualism, but often it's Chinese English, and French isn't an asset at all. In fact, I'm surprised among my friends from Montreal who are bilingual, I'm surprised how little bilingualism in regard to French counts in the Toronto job market. And we're not that far from Montreal. So I think outside of Quebec, bilingualism is always something we talk about from an official perspective, but more and more it's something that ordinary people don't care that much about.
A couple things on that. There was a study done in the University of Guelph in 2011 that actually said that people that are bilingual in the job market outside of Quebec, that is to say French and English, make upwards of 6.6% more in salary than their unilingual compatriots. The other thing, too, is you look at bilingualism in the school system within Quebec and outside of Quebec. French immersion was officially introduced in 1967. 77, there was about 45,000 kids going through it at a time. 2017, fast forward to now, there's 400,000 students, roughly speaking, in immersion across the country.
That includes my own kids, by the way. My own kids are in bilingual education, English, French. But I'm doing that for the same reason kids go to piano lessons, violin lessons, and I mean, I want to overprogram them so they get into college. I'm not.
They're not planning on being prime minister.
No, but I'm not doing it because I think there's some existential good in being bilingual. I'm doing it because when the school says, "Do you want to add a language program?" I say, "Sure." If they offered Spanish, if they offered Chinese, I'd probably say yes to that too.
So does it have less meaning then?
Right,
Adrian?
Right, but
we'll bring in Martin first. Go ahead.
All I would say to that is that there's 2 official languages in this country, and there's a system out there where you can literally send your kid to for free to learn another language. I don't see how you can give that up, and that's why.
But there is pushback now, Martin, against the idea of 2 official languages. Is there not? Is that not a real thing?
I think so. I mean, if you look out west, very large Sikh community, they're teaching Punjabi in the schools, and they have a lot of desire to actually have that more on the official side. But do I think that any minority community is going to be successful enough to get it to the point where it's embedded in our constitution? I think the short answer is no.
But is there a pushback against pushing French?
Yeah, but I also think that outside of the Quebec borders, this conversation is not as rigorous as it perhaps is inside La Belle Province.
We've got to wrap up in just a sec. Last quick word to you, Martin, and then John.
The one thing I would say to that, though, is welcome to globalism. There's immigration across the world. There's a lot of Arab speakers going into Germany right now, Christian and Muslim. Do you think that Germany is going to alter their language policy to make Arabic an official part of their language just because there's a lot of immigrants that happen to go in there? I don't think so.
So is Kevin O'Leary wrong, John?
Look, I think he's going to have a lot of difficulty if you look at the math. Without the 25% or some fraction of the 25% of ridings that are in Quebec, it's very, very difficult to become prime minister. And so, despite all his charms, Kevin may have difficulty unless he learns French very quickly.
Well, thank you. Merci beaucoup.
Merci.
Yeah. Thanks, Martin.
Thank you.
Up next, Robbie Roberts.